Ambassador Miriam Okafor had served the Galactic Commerce Union for 32 years. She had negotiated treaties, resolved disputes, and built bridges between species that had hated each other for millennia. She had given her life to this alliance, and now she stood before the council, watching everything fall apart. The Grand Chamber of the Union was a massive dome of crystalline light. Representatives from the 5 founding species sat in elevated positions, looking down at the human delegation like judges at a trial. The Velthari, with their silver skin and cold eyes. The Kraleth, massive and covered in thick scales. The Nemori, delicate and bird-like. The Thessan, who communicated through colors that rippled across their skin. And the Dravik, ancient and patient, their 6 eyes watching everything. Miriam held a data tablet in her hands. On it was evidence she had spent 3 years gathering. Evidence that would shake the Union to its core. "Honored Council," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I come before you today with a matter of great concern. For the past 60 years, resources from human-administered trade routes have been systematically diverted. Cargo has been redirected. Accounts have been altered. And the evidence points to coordination at the highest levels of Union leadership." The chamber went silent. Miriam could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her. She activated the holographic display. Numbers and charts filled the air above her head. Shipping manifests that didn't match. Financial records with impossible gaps. Communication logs that showed secret meetings between the 5 founding species. Meetings where humans were never invited. Over 60 years, approximately 40 trillion credits worth of resources have been taken from human trade routes, Miriam continued. Resources that were meant for human colonies. Resources that our people needed for medicine, for infrastructure, for survival, and they were stolen. High Chancellor Varus of the Velthari leaned forward. His silver face showed nothing, but his voice was cold. "These are serious accusations, Ambassador. Do you have proof beyond these numbers?" "I have everything, Chancellor. I have the original shipping orders. I have the altered versions. I have recordings of conversations between Union officials discussing how to hide the theft. I have names, dates, and amounts." Miriam looked directly at him. "I have proof that you personally authorized the largest single diversion 3 years ago. 2 billion credits worth of medical supplies meant for the Proxima colony. Supplies that never arrived. Supplies that caused a plague to spread for 3 extra weeks because our doctors had nothing to treat the sick with." The chamber erupted. Representatives from dozens of species began talking at once. Some were shocked. Some were angry. Some looked guilty. Chancellor Varus raised his hand, and silence fell again. "The human ambassador makes wild claims, but claims are not truth. We have conducted our own investigation into irregularities in the trade routes, and we have found the true criminals." A second holographic display activated. It showed human faces, human names, human ships. "The evidence shows that human administrators have been stealing from the Union for decades," Varus announced. "They have used their position as logistics coordinators to enrich themselves and their species at the expense of all others. The theft Ambassador Okafor describes is real, but it was committed by her own people." Miriam felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "That is a lie." "Is it?" Varus gestured, and more images appeared. Bank accounts in human names filled with stolen credits. Cargo manifests with human signatures authorizing illegal transfers. Communication logs showing human officials planning the theft. It was all fake. Miriam knew it was fake because she had seen the real evidence. But the forgeries were perfect. Every detail matched. Every signature looked authentic. They had been planning this for a long time. "The Council will now vote," Varus said, "on the matter of human membership in the Galactic Commerce Union." "You cannot do this," Miriam said. "We have been part of this union for 200 years. We built half the stations in this sector. We created the logistics network that makes trade possible. You cannot simply—" "Humanity has no voting rights in this council," Varus interrupted. "You have advisory status only. You were guests in our union, and guests who steal from their hosts are no longer welcome." The vote was unanimous. All 5 founding species voted to expel humanity from the Union. Human assets would be seized to pay for the alleged theft. Human personnel would be detained until the investigation was complete. Human ships would be impounded. Human colonies in Union space would be evacuated. Miriam stood frozen as the verdict was read. 200 years of work, 200 years of partnership, 200 years of humanity being the best allies the Union had ever known, and it was all being erased because they had become too useful to share with. She finally understood. The theft had never been about money. It had been about making humanity dependent, about keeping humans in a position where they could be used but never become equals. And when humans started to notice, when they started to ask questions, the founding species had decided to cut their losses. You have 30 standard days to remove all human personnel from Union space, Varys announced. After that, any human found within our borders will be arrested and tried for conspiracy against the Union. Guards approached Miriam, Velthari soldiers in silver armor, their weapons drawn but not aimed. They were escorting her out, like a criminal, like a thief. As she walked toward the door, Miriam stopped. She turned back to face the council one last time. We came to you in peace, she said. 200 years ago, when humanity first reached the stars, we could have been conquerors. We had the technology. We had the numbers. We had every reason to take what we wanted and crush anyone who stood in our way. But we chose partnership instead. We chose to join your union. We chose to build rather than destroy. She looked at each of the founding species in turn. The Velthari who had planned this betrayal, the Kralith who had gone along with it for profit, the Nemori who had stayed silent out of fear, the Thessan who had pretended not to notice, and the Dravik who had watched it all happen with their ancient, knowing eyes. We gave you 200 years of loyalty, Miriam continued. We gave you our best engineers, our best scientists, our best diplomats. We built your stations and mapped your trade routes and kept your alliance from falling apart a dozen times. And this is how you repay us. Chancellor Varys smiled. It was a cold smile, full of satisfaction. You were useful, Ambassador, but usefulness has its limits. Humanity served its purpose. Now it is time for you to go. Miriam nodded slowly. Yes, it is time for us to go. She turned and walked toward the exit. The guards fell in beside her, their armor clanking against the crystal floor. The representatives watched her go, some with guilt in their eyes, most with relief. At the door, Miriam paused one final time. She did not turn around. She spoke quietly, but in the silent chamber, everyone heard her words. You could have just asked us to leave. Then she was gone. The council chamber buzzed with conversation after her departure. Representatives congratulated each other on a difficult situation handled well. The founding species discussed how to divide the seized human assets among themselves. Everyone agreed that this was the best outcome. Humanity had been growing too powerful, too influential. It was better to remove them now while it was still possible. No one noticed the small smile on Ambassador Okafor's face as she walked through the halls of the Union capital. No one saw her activate her personal communicator. No one heard the single word she transmitted to human ships waiting in orbit. Begin. On the human colony ship Endeavour, Captain James Chen received the message. He had been waiting for it for 3 years. He had hoped it would never come, but he had always known it might. He turned to his crew. You heard the ambassador. Begin the withdrawal. All human personnel are to return to their ships immediately. All human assets are to be prepared for transport. We leave nothing behind. His first officer, a woman named Sarah Torres, looked at him with concern. Captain, the council has given us 30 days. We don't need to rush. Chen shook his head. 30 days is for the evacuation they expect. What we're doing will take less than a week. Sir, what exactly are we doing? Captain Chen looked out the viewport at the Union capital below. For 200 years, humans had built and maintained and protected this alliance. They had poured their hearts into making it work, and now they had been thrown away like tools that were no longer needed. We're taking back what belongs to us, he said quietly. Every piece of technology we created, every system we designed, every line of code we wrote. We're taking it all. Torres stared at him. Sir, that would cripple the Union. Half their infrastructure runs on human systems. I know. They'll blame us. They'll say we sabotage them. They already blame us for everything. Chen turned to face his crew. For 200 years, we played by their rules. We were patient. We were kind. We were good allies, and they repaid us with betrayal. Now we play by our rules. He activated the ship-wide communication system. His voice echoed through every corridor, every cabin, every cargo hold. This is Captain Chen. As of this moment, Operation Homecoming is in effect. All personnel report to your designated stations. All extraction teams prepare for deployment. We have work to do. Throughout Union space, on 1,000 stations and 100 worlds, humans received the same message. They had been preparing for this day for years, hoping it would never come, knowing it probably would. Now they moved with quiet efficiency, gathering their belongings, backing up their files, and preparing to leave. But they would not leave empty-handed. The Union had no idea what was coming. They thought they had won. They thought humans would slink away in shame and defeat. They thought the matter was settled. They were wrong. Humanity had spent 200 years learning everything about the Union, every system, every weakness, every secret. And now they were going to use that knowledge, not for revenge, not for war, for something much worse. They were going to take back everything they had ever given and let the Union see exactly how much they had depended on the species they had just betrayed. The countdown had begun. Station Commander Thalos of the Velthari watched the human engineers with growing confusion. They were supposed to be packing their personal belongings. They were supposed to be preparing for a shameful departure. Instead, they were dismantling the station. "What are you doing?" he demanded, approaching a human woman who was removing panels from the wall. "Those are Union systems. You cannot take them." The woman looked up at him with tired eyes. Her name tag read Dr. Elena Vasquez. She had worked on this station for 15 years. She had designed half its systems. "These are not Union systems, Commander," she said calmly. "These are human systems. We installed them. We maintain them. And according to our original contract with the Union, they remain human property." Telos felt his silver skin grow cold. "What contract?" Dr. Vasquez pulled out a data tablet and handed it to him. The document on the screen was 200 years old. It was written in formal legal language, signed by representatives of both humanity and the founding species, and buried in the technical sections, in language that no one had ever bothered to read carefully, was a clause that made Thalos's heart stop. All technological systems designed, installed, or maintained by human personnel shall remain the intellectual and physical property of humanity. The Galactic Commerce Union is granted a perpetual license to use said systems contingent upon continued human membership in the Union. Should human membership be terminated for any reason, this license shall be revoked and humanity shall have the right to reclaim all proprietary systems. "This cannot be legal," Thalos said. "This was signed 2 centuries ago. No one remembers." "We remember," Dr. Vasquez said. "We always remembered. We hoped we would never need this clause. We hoped the Union would treat us fairly." She took back the tablet. "We were wrong." Across the station, human engineers were doing the same thing. They removed navigation computers and communication arrays. They disconnected power regulators and life support controllers. They took everything they had ever built or designed or improved. And they did it all with perfect legal authority. Thalos rushed to the command center and opened a channel to Union headquarters. "This is Station Commander Thalos. I need to speak with High Chancellor Varys immediately. We have a serious problem." An hour later, Varys's face appeared on the screen. He looked annoyed at being disturbed. "What is it, Commander? We are very busy processing the human expulsion." "Chancellor, the humans are taking everything. They have contracts that give them ownership of most of our station systems. Navigation, communication, life support, they designed all of it, and they're claiming it as their property." Varys's silver face went pale. "That is impossible. Those systems were gifts to the Union." "They were never gifts, Chancellor. They were licensed, and we just revoked their membership, which means we revoked the license." The silence that followed was terrible. Thalos could see Varys working through the implications. If this was true on one station, it was probably true on every station, and every ship, and every colony. Humans had spent 200 years building the Union's infrastructure, and now they were taking it back. "Stop them," Varys ordered, "by force if necessary. Chancellor, they have legal documentation. If we use force against them while they are exercising their contractual rights, we will be in violation of Union law. Other species will lose trust in our treaties. Our entire alliance is built on the sanctity of contracts. Varys's jaw tightened. Then negotiate, offer them compensation, offer them anything, but do not let them leave with our systems. Thalos tried. He offered credits. He offered trade deals. He offered to reinstate human membership with full voting rights. The humans refused everything. You had 200 years to treat us as equals, Dr. Vasquez told him. 200 years to share power and wealth fairly. You chose to steal from us instead. You chose to frame us for your crimes. There is nothing you can offer now that will undo what you have done. She continued removing components from the wall. We do not want your money, Commander. We do not want your apologies. We just want to go home, and we are taking what belongs to us. The withdrawal continued for 6 days. Human ships moved through Union space with methodical precision, stopping at every station, every outpost, every colony where humans had worked. They collected their people and their property. They removed systems that the Union had grown to depend on. They left nothing behind. On the 4th day, the first major system failure occurred. A navigation beacon in the Thesson sector went offline. The beacon had been installed by human engineers 70 years ago. Without it, ships could not safely enter or exit the sector's busiest trade route. Trade stopped. Ships sat idle in ports, waiting for repairs that would never come. The Thesson government demanded that the Union fix the problem immediately, but no one knew how. The beacon had been maintained by humans. The technology was human, and the humans were gone. On the 5th day, the communication network began to collapse. Relay stations that connected distant parts of the Union went dark one by one. Messages that once took seconds to deliver now took hours or days, routed through increasingly congested backup channels. On the 6th day, the translation matrices failed. These were the systems that allowed different species to understand each other. Humans had designed them, improved them, and maintained them for 2 centuries. Without them, the Union's hundreds of species could barely communicate. The Council held an emergency session. Representatives screamed at each other in languages no one else could understand. The Thesson colors flashed in patterns of pure panic. The Kralith roared in frustration. The Nemori tried to mediate, but no one could hear their soft voices over the chaos. High Chancellor Varys sat in his elevated chair and watched his alliance crumble. In less than a week, humanity had done more damage than any war could have achieved, and they had not fired a single shot. They had not broken a single law. They had simply taken back what was theirs and left the Union to face the consequences. His aide approached with a report. Chancellor, we have finished our assessment. The situation is worse than we feared. Varys took the report with trembling hands. The numbers were devastating. 60% of Union navigation systems were human-designed and had been removed or disabled. 40% of communication infrastructure was offline. 70% of stations were experiencing critical system failures. Trade had dropped by 80% in less than a week. How long to repair the damage? Varys asked. The aide hesitated. Chancellor, we cannot repair it. We do not have the technical knowledge. Human engineers designed these systems. Human scientists understood how they worked. Without them, we cannot rebuild. We would have to start from scratch and develop entirely new technologies. How long? Decades, Chancellor. Perhaps centuries. Varys closed his eyes. He had expected the human withdrawal to be a minor inconvenience. He had thought the Union was strong enough to survive without them. He had been catastrophically wrong. Humanity had spent 200 years making themselves indispensable, not through force or threats, but through competence and kindness. They had solved problems no one else could solve. They had built systems no one else could build. They had made themselves the foundation upon which the entire Union rested. And when the Union betrayed them, they simply removed that foundation and walked away. The last human ship left Union space on the 7th day. It was the Endeavour, carrying Ambassador Miriam Okafor and the remaining diplomatic staff. As the ship crossed the border, Okafor looked back at the chaos they were leaving behind. Do you think we did the right thing? Captain Chen asked. Okafor was silent for a long moment. They stole from us for 60 years. They framed us for their crimes. They threw away 2 centuries of partnership because they were afraid of how powerful we were becoming. She shook her head. We did not do this to them. They did this to themselves. We just stopped cleaning up their messes. Behind them, the Union burned, not with fire, but with chaos and collapse. Species that had depended on human systems found themselves suddenly helpless. Alliances that had held for centuries began to crack as old rivalries resurfaced. The great Galactic Commerce Union, which had once spanned a quarter of the galaxy, was falling apart. And in the darkness of human space, something was waiting. The Union had thought they were expelling a useful servant. They were about to discover that they had unleashed something far more dangerous. 6 months passed. The Union struggled to survive. Some species formed new alliances. Some turned to war. Some simply collapsed into isolation, unable to function without the systems that humans had built for them. And then finally, a Union scout ship managed to penetrate human territory. It had been sent to gather intelligence, to find out what humanity was doing in their self-imposed exile. The crew expected to find a wounded civilization, struggling to rebuild after being cast out from the galactic community. What they found was something else entirely. The scout emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory. The pilot, a young Namori named Ferris, checked his sensors and immediately thought they were malfunctioning. That cannot be right, he whispered. His co-pilot, a Kralith named Braun, looked at the readings and felt his scales rise in fear. Those are accurate. I am reading thousands of ships, stations the size of moons, energy signatures beyond anything in our databases. They watched in stunned silence as a human fleet passed nearby. The ships were massive, sleek, and powerful. They moved with perfect coordination, like a single organism. And there were so many of them, more ships than the entire Union Navy combined. They were hiding this, Ferris said. All those years in the Union, they were hiding their true capability. Why? Braun asked. If they had this power, why did they stay? Why did they let us treat them like servants? The answer came to both of them at the same time. Humanity had not stayed in the Union because they needed to. They had stayed because they wanted to. They had stayed because they believed in partnership and cooperation. They had held back their true strength because they did not want to intimidate or dominate their allies. And the Union had repaid that restraint with betrayal. As the scout ship fled back toward Union space, carrying its terrible report, both crew members knew that everything was about to change. Humanity was not a wounded exile, licking its wounds in the darkness. Humanity was a giant that had been pretending to be small, and now the giant was awake. The Union had made a terrible mistake, and they were about to find out just how terrible it was. The report from the scout ship spread through the Union like a disease. Within hours, every government knew. Within days, panic had set in. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was not weak. Humanity had been holding back the entire time, and now they were free. High Chancellor Varys read the report in his private chambers. His hands shook as he scrolled through the images. Human ships that dwarfed anything in the Union Navy. Stations that could house billions. Manufacturing facilities that produced more in a day than Union factories produced in a year. How is this possible? He whispered to his aide. We monitored them constantly. We inspected their ships, their colonies, their research facilities. We never saw any of this. The aide swallowed nervously. Chancellor, it appears that what we inspected was only what they wanted us to see. Human space is vast. Their core systems were always off limits to Union observers, supposedly for security reasons. We never questioned it, because we thought they were hiding weakness, not strength. Yes, Chancellor. Varys slammed his fist against his desk. We are fools. We expelled the most powerful species in the galaxy because we were afraid they were becoming too useful. And now they are free to do whatever they want. He looked at the images again. A massive shipyard, big enough to build 100 vessels at once. A research station orbiting a star, drawing power directly from the nuclear fires below. A colony world with cities that stretched from horizon to horizon. This was what humanity had been building while they smiled and served the Union. This was what they had hidden while they let themselves be treated as second-class members. This was their true face. What do we do? The aide asked. Varys had no answer. The collapse accelerated in the following months. Without human systems, the Union could barely function. Without human diplomats, old conflicts erupted into new wars. Without human trade coordinators, supply chains broke down completely. The Kralith accused the Thesan of hoarding resources. The Thesan accused the Kralith of blocking trade routes. Within weeks, their fleets were firing on each other. The war was brutal and pointless. Both sides suffered massive casualties, and no one could stop it because the humans who had always mediated such disputes were gone. The Nemori tried to negotiate peace, but without the translation matrices, they could barely make themselves understood. Their delicate voices were drowned out by the roar of weapons and the screams of the dying. The Dravik withdrew into isolation. They had seen this coming, their ancient eyes watching the Union's slow decay for decades. They had tried to warn the other founding species, but no one had listened. Now they simply closed their borders and waited for the storm to pass. On 100 worlds, people went hungry. The complex supply chains that humans had built and maintained were broken beyond repair. Food rotted in warehouses because no one knew how to transport it efficiently. Medicine sat unused because the distribution networks had collapsed. Children died of diseases that should have been easily treatable, simply because the right supplies could not reach the right places. The Union Council met in emergency session after emergency session. They argued and blamed each other and accomplished nothing. The founding species could not agree on anything. The minor species, who had never had real power, began to demand changes. Some threatened to leave the Union entirely. On the Velthari homeworld, riots broke out. Citizens demanded answers. Why had the Council expelled humanity? Why had they thrown away the alliance that had kept everyone safe and prosperous for 2 centuries? The government deployed troops to restore order, but the damage was done. Faith in Union leadership had shattered. High Chancellor Varys made a public address, trying to calm the population. He blamed the humans for the crisis. He said they had sabotaged Union systems before leaving. He called them traitors and cowards and thieves. But people had seen the contracts. They knew that humans had not sabotaged anything. They had simply taken back what was legally theirs. The only sabotage had been the Union's own decision to expel them. Varys's approval rating collapsed. Within a month, he faced a vote of no confidence. Within 2 months, he was removed from office. His replacement lasted 3 weeks before she was also removed. The Union was eating itself alive. On a small colony world near the edge of Union space, a different kind of scene was playing out. The colony was called Harvest, and it was home to 1 million people from a dozen different species. It had been a thriving agricultural community, supplying food to a dozen nearby systems. Now it was starving. The human logistics coordinators who had managed Harvest food distribution were gone. The systems they had built to track crops and shipments and storage had been removed. The colony's leaders had tried to rebuild the distribution network themselves, but they had failed. They did not understand how the systems worked. They did not know how to balance supply and demand across multiple species with different nutritional needs. Governor Kellis of the Nemori walked through the streets of the capital city, watching her people suffer. Food riots had destroyed several warehouses. The hospital was overwhelmed with malnutrition cases, and winter was coming. Without a functioning distribution system, many would not survive. "We did this to ourselves," she said to her aide. "We voted to expel humanity. We thought we were protecting ourselves from becoming dependent on them, and now we are dying because we were already dependent. And we never knew it." Her aide, a young Thesan whose colors had turned the gray of despair, said nothing. There was nothing to say. A ship arrived at Harvest 3 days later. It was human. Governor Kellis met the human delegation at the spaceport. She expected anger. She expected accusations. She expected to be told that Harvest deserved its fate for supporting the expulsion. Instead, the human woman who stepped off the ship simply smiled and said, "We heard you needed help." Her name was Dr. Sarah Torres. She had once served as first officer on the Endeavor. Now she led a humanitarian mission that had been traveling through the border regions, offering aid to struggling colonies. "Why?" Governor Kellis asked, her voice breaking. "We voted against you. We helped throw you out. Why would you help us?" Dr. Torres looked at the hungry crowds gathered beyond the spaceport fence. Children with hollow eyes, parents with desperate faces, species that had once lived in prosperity, now reduced to begging for scraps. "Because you are suffering," she said simply, "and we can help. That is reason enough." The human team worked for 2 weeks. They rebuilt the distribution systems. They trained local administrators. They organized emergency food supplies from human territory. By the time they left, Harvest was no longer starving. Governor Kellis tried to thank them. She tried to apologize for what the Union had done. Dr. Torres just shook her head. "We do not want apologies," she said. "We want you to remember this moment. Remember that when your own alliance abandoned you, when your own leaders failed you, humans came to help. Not because we owed you anything, not because we wanted something in return, but because it was the right thing to do." She boarded her ship and flew away, leaving behind a colony that would never forget. Stories like this spread through the Union. Human ships appearing at struggling colonies. Human doctors treating the sick. Human engineers repairing critical systems. Human diplomats mediating disputes before they turned into wars. They were not doing it for all colonies. They were choosing carefully. The species and communities that had opposed the expulsion or that had treated humans with kindness during the withdrawal received help. Those that had celebrated humanity's removal or that had been cruel during the exodus received nothing. It was a message. Humanity remembered who had been friend and who had been foe, and they were rewarding accordingly. The Union's remaining leadership watched these developments with growing fear. Humanity was building influence, not through conquest, but through kindness, not through force, but through competence. Species that had once been loyal to the Union were now looking toward human space with hope. "They are stealing our allies," a Krelleth general complained at a council meeting. "Every colony they help becomes another voice calling for reconciliation with humanity." "They are not stealing anything," a Nemori representative replied. "They are simply being better allies than we ever were. If we lose influence, it is because we failed our people, not because humans helped them." The argument lasted for hours. It solved nothing. In the darkness of space, on the border between Union territory and human space, a massive fleet was assembling. Human ships, thousands of them, arranged in perfect formation. They had been gathering for months, waiting for orders. Ambassador Miriam Okafor stood on the bridge of the flagship, looking at the display that showed the Union's crumbling territory. She felt no satisfaction, no joy, only a deep sadness for what might have been. "The Council has requested a meeting," her aide reported. "They want to discuss terms for reconciliation." Miriam nodded slowly. "Tell them we will meet, but not to discuss reconciliation." "Then what, Ambassador?" Miriam turned to face the assembled officers. These were the best humanity had to offer. Scientists and soldiers, diplomats and engineers. They had spent 200 years pretending to be less than they were. They had endured insults and theft and betrayal with patience and grace. Now their patience had run out. "We are not going back to the Union," Miriam announced. "We are not going to beg for readmission or negotiate for equal treatment. Those days are over." She activated a holographic display. It showed Union space, broken and bleeding, trade routes in chaos, alliances shattered, economies collapsed. "The Union stole from us for 60 years, Miriam continued. "They framed us for their crimes. They threw us out like garbage, and now they are drowning in the mess they created." She looked at each officer in turn. "We are going to save them, not because they deserve it, not because we forgive them, but because we are humanity, and this is what we do. We build, we protect, we fix what is broken." Her eyes hardened. "But this time, we will not be servants. This time, we will not be guests. This time, when we save them, they will owe us everything, and we will collect." The fleet began to move. Thousands of ships carrying the future of the galaxy. Behind them, human space continued to thrive. Before them, the Union waited in fear and desperate hope. Humanity was coming back, and nothing would ever be the same. The Union delegation arrived at the neutral station, expecting to negotiate from a position of desperation. What they found instead was a lesson in humility that none of them would ever forget. The station was called Threshold. It sat exactly on the border between human space and Union territory, a massive structure that humans had built in just 3 months. The Union engineers who saw it could not understand how such construction was possible. Their own shipyards would have taken years to build something similar. High Counselor Taurus of the Belthari led the delegation. He had replaced the disgraced Varus and was supposed to represent a new, more reasonable Union leadership. Behind him walked representatives from all 5 founding species, plus observers from a dozen minor species who had demanded a voice in any negotiations. Ambassador Miriam Okafor met them in the station's main conference chamber. She looked older than Terrace remembered, more tired, but her eyes were sharp, and her posture was straight. She was not broken, she was not defeated, she was patient, like a hunter who knew the trap had already closed. "Welcome to Threshold," she said. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." The delegations took their places across a long table. Human aides served refreshments, real food and drink, not the synthetic substitutes that Union species had been surviving on since the collapse. The contrast was obvious and intentional. Counselor Terrace cleared his throat. "Ambassador Okafor, we come seeking reconciliation. The Union recognizes that mistakes were made. We are prepared to offer humanity full membership with voting rights, compensation for seized assets, and a formal apology from the Council." Miriam listened without expression. When he finished, she simply nodded. "I appreciate the offer, Counselor, but we are not here to rejoin the Union." Terrace frowned. "Then why did you agree to this meeting?" "To explain what happens next." Miriam activated a holographic display. "Before we proceed, I want to show you something. Something that will help you understand why reconciliation, as you imagine it, is impossible." The display showed a timeline. It started 200 years ago, when humanity first made contact with the Union. "When we joined your alliance, we were new to interstellar travel," Miriam began. "We had only just developed faster-than-light engines. We had no idea what awaited us among the stars. Your Union seemed like a dream come true. Hundreds of species living in peace, trading freely, building a better future together." The timeline advanced. Images showed human ships entering Union space, human diplomats signing treaties, human engineers beginning work on stations and systems. We threw ourselves into the Union with all our hearts. We wanted to prove ourselves worthy. We wanted to be good allies, good partners, good friends. We shared our technology. We shared our knowledge. We worked harder than any other species to contribute to the common good. Terrace shifted uncomfortably. Yes, humanity's contributions were significant. "They were essential," Miriam corrected. "Within 50 years, humans were running most of the Union's critical infrastructure. Not because we demanded those positions, but because we were simply better at the work than anyone else. Your species had been spacefaring for millennia, but you had grown complacent. You had stopped innovating. We were young and hungry and eager to build." The timeline showed more images. Human-designed stations, human-coded systems, human-built ships serving in Union fleets. And then, about 60 years ago, something changed. Miriam's voice grew cold. "The founding species realized that humanity was becoming too influential, too necessary. You began to fear us, not because we threatened you, but because you could not imagine sharing power with a species you considered inferior." The display showed secret meetings, stolen resources, forged documents. "So you started stealing from us, small amounts at first, then larger. You thought you were weakening us, making us dependent on Union support. In reality, you were just confirming what some of us had suspected all along." Counselor Terrace raised his hand. "Ambassador, we have acknowledged these crimes. We are prepared to make amends." "You are not listening." Miriam's eyes locked onto his. "The theft was not the betrayal. The theft was just a symptom. The betrayal was that you never intended to treat us as equals. You never intended to share power. You smiled and accepted our help and planned to discard us the moment we became inconvenient." She leaned forward. "We knew about the theft almost from the beginning. We tracked every stolen credit, every diverted shipment, every falsified record. We could have exposed you decades ago. We chose not to." The delegation exchanged confused looks. "Why?" asked the Krelith representative. Because we wanted to give you a chance. We wanted to believe that the Union could change, that the founding species could overcome their fear and prejudice. We spent 60 years hoping you would prove us wrong about you. The timeline reached the present day. The vote to expel humanity, the withdrawal, the collapse. Instead, you proved us right. When we presented evidence of your theft, you responded with lies and expulsion. You chose betrayal over honesty. You chose fear over partnership. You chose to throw away 200 years of alliance rather than admit you were wrong. Miriam stood and walked to the viewport. Outside, human ships moved in perfect formation, hundreds of them, visible even from this distance. Now I will show you what you threw away. The holographic display changed. It showed human space, not the small, limited territory the Union had believed they occupied, but a vast empire stretching across thousands of systems. When humanity first joined the Union, we were not as new to space travel as we let you believe. We had been exploring for decades before we made contact. We had colonized dozens of worlds. We had developed technologies far beyond anything the Union possessed. The delegation stared in shock. The display showed massive shipyards, planet-sized manufacturing facilities, research stations that orbited black holes. We hid all of this because we wanted peace. We wanted partnership. We knew that if the Union saw our true strength, you would fear us even more. So we showed you only what you expected to see. A young species, eager to learn, happy to serve. Counselor Terrace found his voice. Why? If you had this power, why did you let us treat you as servants? Miriam turned to face him. Because we are not conquerors, Counselor. We did not want to rule the galaxy. We wanted to be part of something greater than ourselves. We wanted friends, not subjects. We wanted allies, not servants. She gestured at the display. Look at what we built while we pretended to be weak. Look at what we could have done at any moment. We could have crushed the Union. We could have taken everything by force. We could have made every species in the galaxy bow to human rule. Her voice softened. We did not want that. We still do not want that. We want what we have always wanted, a galaxy where different species can live together in peace and prosperity. But we have learned that such a galaxy will not build itself. It must be built, and it must be built by those strong enough to protect it. The delegation sat in stunned silence. Everything they had believed about humanity was wrong. Every assumption, every calculation, every plan, all of it based on false information. The Thessan representative, whose colors had turned white with shock, finally spoke. What do you want from us? Miriam returned to her seat. I want you to understand the situation clearly. The Union is dying. Your economies are in ruins. Your alliances are fractured. Your people are suffering. Without help, you will collapse completely within 5 years. She placed a data tablet on the table. Humanity can save you. We can restore your systems. We can rebuild your trade networks. We can mediate your conflicts and feed your hungry and heal your sick. We can do everything we did before, and more. Counselor Terrace reached for the tablet. And in return? In return, you will give us what you always denied us. Not membership, not equality, not partnership. Miriam smiled, and there was no warmth in it. You will give us ownership. The tablet displayed a document. It was hundreds of pages long, filled with legal language and technical specifications. But the summary was simple. Every system humanity designed or built or maintained in Union space becomes human property. Every station, every trade route, every communication network. You will continue to use them, but you will pay us for that privilege. You will pay rent, licensing fees, and maintenance costs. You will pay until the debt you owe us is cleared, which by our calculations will take approximately 300 years. The delegation erupted in protest. The Kralith representative stood, his scales bristling with rage. This is extortion. You cannot expect us to accept these terms. I expect nothing, Miriam replied calmly. I am simply telling you what we will do. You can accept our terms and survive, or you can refuse and watch your civilizations crumble. The choice is yours. The Velthari counselor stared at her. You would let billions die? You would let entire species go extinct? We would let you experience the consequences of your own choices? Miriam's voice was cold. For 200 years, we protected you from those consequences. We cleaned up your messes. We solved your problems. We let you believe you were the masters of the galaxy while we did all the real work. She stood again, preparing to leave. Those days are over. We will not abandon the innocent. We have already helped colonies that treated us fairly. But the founding species, the governments that voted to betray us, you will pay for what you did. Not with blood, not with lives, with money and power and pride. You will pay until you understand exactly how much you depended on the people you threw away. She walked to the door, then paused. You have 1 week to decide. After that, the offer expires, and you will face the future alone. The door closed behind her. The delegation sat in silence, staring at the document that would reshape the galaxy. They had come expecting to negotiate with a defeated exile. They had found an empire that had been hiding in plain sight for 2 centuries, and now that empire was ready to collect everything it was owed. The Union had betrayed humanity. Now humanity was going to make them pay. Not with war, not with conquest, with something far more devastating. They were going to make the Union work for them, forever. The week passed like a slow death. The Union Council debated endlessly. Some demanded war. Some demanded surrender. Some simply sat in silence, unable to comprehend how completely the situation had reversed. In the end, there was no real choice. The Union was dying. Their systems were failing. Their people were starving. Their alliances were crumbling. They could accept humanity's terms and survive as tenants in their own territory, or they could refuse and watch everything collapse. The vote was not unanimous. The Krilleth refused to accept what they called slavery. They withdrew from the Union entirely, taking their fleets and their worlds and their pride into isolation. Everyone knew they would not last long alone, but they preferred death to submission. The other founding species voted to accept. The Velthari, the Nemori, the Thessan, and the Dravik all signed the agreement. They did not do it happily. They did it because they had no other choice. Human ships entered Union space 1 year after the expulsion, not as guests this time, not as servants, as owners. The takeover was methodical and efficient. Human engineers returned to the stations they had once built, repairing systems that had deteriorated during the collapse. Human administrators took control of trade routes and communication networks. Human lawyers processed the endless contracts and agreements that transferred ownership of Union infrastructure to Earth. The founding species watched their empires become rental properties. Stations that had been symbols of their power now displayed human logos. Trade routes that had made them wealthy now paid fees to human corporations. Communication networks that had connected their civilizations now belonged to people they had once dismissed as servants. Ambassador Miriam Okafor oversaw the transition from her new office on the Threshold Station. She had been appointed Governor of Union Affairs, a title that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Now it simply reflected reality. Humanity was in charge. Everyone else was paying rent. Reports came in daily. The Velthari homeworld, once the center of Union power, was now managed by a human administrative council. The great crystal dome still stood, but the decisions made beneath them required human approval. Every budget, every policy, every trade agreement had to pass through human oversight. The Thessan sector, which had once been the Union's agricultural heartland, now operated under human-designed distribution systems. Food flowed efficiently again, ending the famines that had killed millions during the collapse. But the Thessan paid for that efficiency with taxes and fees that would take generations to clear. The Nemori, who had always been the most reasonable of the founding species, adapted the fastest. They accepted human administrators without complaint. They paid their fees on time. They even began learning human languages and customs, recognizing that the future belonged to those who could work with the new masters of the galaxy. The Draviks simply watched. Their ancient eyes had seen empires rise and fall for millennia. They had tried to warn the other founding species about the danger of betraying humanity. No one had listened. Now they accepted their fate with the dignity of a people who understood that some mistakes could not be undone. 3 months after the takeover, Miriam held a ceremony on the Velthari homeworld. It took place in the grand chamber where humanity had been expelled. The same room where she had presented evidence of theft and been called a liar. The same room where the vote had been unanimous against her people. The chamber was full. Representatives from every species in the former Union sat in the same seats where they had once condemned humanity. But the elevated positions where the founding species had looked down on everyone else were empty. Those seats had been removed. In their place stood a simple podium where Miriam would address the assembly. 1 year ago, I stood in this chamber and watched everything I had worked for be destroyed. She began. I watched species I had trusted for decades vote to throw my people out of an alliance we had helped build. I watched lies become truth and truth become lies. I watched 200 years of partnership end in betrayal. The chamber was silent. No one dared interrupt. Today, I stand here again. Not as a diplomat begging for fairness, not as an ambassador pleading for understanding. I stand here as the representative of the species that now owns most of the infrastructure in this room, in this city, on this world. She let that sink in before continuing. We did not want this. I need you to understand that. Humanity never wanted to rule anyone. We wanted partners. We wanted friends. We wanted to be part of something greater than ourselves. You denied us that. You used us and lied to us and threw us away when we became inconvenient. Miriam looked at the faces before her. Some showed shame. Some showed anger. Some showed nothing at all, too broken to feel anymore. But we are not here for revenge. We are not going to enslave you or exterminate you or treat you the way you treated us. That is not who we are. That is not who we want to be. She activated a holographic display. It showed a new document, not the harsh terms of the takeover agreement, but something different, something unexpected. This is the Redemption Protocol. It outlines a path for every species in this chamber to earn back their independence. Not through war, not through rebellion, through work and trust and time. The display showed a timeline. It was long, centuries long, but it had an ending. Those of you who work with us honestly will see your debts reduced. Those who contribute to the common good will earn credits toward freedom. Those who prove they can be trusted will gradually regain control of their own affairs. In 300 years, if everything goes well, the last of the founding species will be fully independent again. Murmurs spread through the chamber. 300 years was a long time, but it was not forever. It was not slavery. It was a sentence with an ending. We could have chosen permanent domination, Miriam continued. We could have made ourselves masters of this galaxy for eternity. We have the power. We have the technology. We have every justification after what you did to us. She shook her head slowly. But that is not justice. That is just another form of betrayal, betraying our own values to punish those who wronged us. We are better than that. We have to be better than that. She looked directly at the Velthari delegation. You stole from us for 60 years. You framed us for your crimes. You threw us out like garbage, and we responded by taking everything you had. Now we will give you the chance to earn it back. That is the difference between us. You saw our weakness and tried to exploit it. We see your weakness and offer you a path to strength. The ceremony concluded with the signing of the Redemption Protocol. Every species that accepted the terms would begin their long journey toward independence. It would not be easy, it would not be quick, but it would be fair, fairer than humanity had any obligation to be. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, a young Velthari approached Miriam. He was barely an adult, too young to have been involved in the betrayal, old enough to live with its consequences. Why? He asked. After everything we did, why are you giving us a chance? Miriam studied him for a long moment. She saw fear in his silver eyes, but also hope. He represented the future, a generation that had not chosen betrayal, but had to live with its aftermath. Because hatred is a prison, she said finally. If we spend our lives punishing you, we become prisoners of your crimes. We would rather spend our lives building something new, something better, something that your generation and ours can share. The young Velthari bowed, a gesture of respect that his elders would never have offered to a human. Thank you, he said. I will try to be worthy of this chance. That is all we ask. Miriam watched him go, then turned to look out the window at the city below. It was a Velthari city, But human ships patrolled its skies. Human logos marked its buildings. Human systems kept its lights burning and its people fed. She did not feel proud. She did not feel victorious. She felt tired and sad and hopeful all at once. Humanity had been betrayed. They had responded by taking everything, but they had also offered a way forward, a path that led not to eternal domination, but to eventual reconciliation. Whether the galaxy would walk that path remained to be seen. Old hatreds died slowly. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. There would be resistance and resentment and setbacks along the way. But humanity would be there, patient and strong, building and protecting and waiting. They had waited 200 years for the Union to prove worthy of partnership. They could wait 300 more. And in the meantime, the rent was due. Paid on time, every month, forever. Miriam smiled as she headed back to her office. There was work to do. There was always work to do. That was what it meant to be human. You saw what was broken, and you fixed it. You saw what was possible, and you built it. You saw what was wrong, and you made it right. Even when the galaxy did not deserve it. Even when the cost was everything you had. Even then you kept building. Because that was who you were. That was who you had always been. That was humanity. And the galaxy was finally beginning to understand.